May 10th, near dawn. It is hard to tell about last night. So many things happened. While Sally talked with Martha and the children, Davy got me ready by mixing up a fine batch of med right there on Sally's floor and rubbing it all over my face and hands and even the brass buttons of my uniform. Won't it be hard to get through with all of them? I asked Davy at one point. Sally is telling them now what they must do, he said. They will listen to her, and the rain will help. That was true about the rain. It was a cold, steady shower now, the kind of weather that drives most soldiers to find shelter. Still, trying to slip 7 people past the reps would be pretty hard to do. And then there was Sally. Will Sally be okay, I asked. Will she be able to make the journey? Those woods are fierce and... Davy waved the questions away. If any of us make it out, it will be Sally. Don't you go worrying about her, Sergeant. Worry about yourself. Sally finished talking with Martha and the children. Then she turned to us and let out a soft laugh when she saw me. She said something to Davy, who also laughed. She says the mud makes you look like her husband, who is gone 10 years now, but she thinks you might even be scrawnier. We left right after this, with Davy leading. The oldest child, who was a girl, was right behind her father. Behind the girl came Martha, who was holding the hand of a boy, while Sally followed them with the other child, a girl, in tow. I came last in our little parade. Come along, Davy said as he entered the woods by way of a tiny trail. I thought we would be in for a bad trip when the little girl became afraid and started whining and struggling to avoid entering the dark woods. That kind of action was okay here near the empty clearing, but if we was close to Reb soldiers, it could cost us dearly. Fortunately, Sally gave the little girl's arm a hard tug and said something in her ear, and then we went on without a peep from either child. Davy had moved ahead of us, about 30 or 40 feet, so we could barely see him. He told us before leaving that we was to watch him carefully and to move when he moved, stop when he stopped. He seemed to have a purpose for every step he took, at least I hope so. The woods all looked the same to me, and without a moon or stars I had no idea what direction we was headed. Sally was right to make me wait. Without a guide I would have been lost in no time or been scooped up by the Rebs. If I had any doubts about this, they disappeared when we was about a half-mile from the clearing. Davy suddenly stopped and did not move for a very long time. I could see him leaning forward, listening and searching the woods. He heard or saw something, I was sure. But what? Time dragged along while we waited, and the 2 littles began pulling this way and that. Both Sally and Martha knelt beside the children, holding them tight and whispering to them. At last Davy came back to us and whispered first to Sally and then to me that there was a small fire in the woods off to the right about 200 feet. Guards of the pasture where a sizable number of Rebs was camped, Davy guessed. If that was true, I told Davy, it meant that there was other guards positioned all around the field at regular intervals. Is there another way? I asked. Davy shook his head no, and said this was the best route. There was another Reb camp to the left, and the land to the right was too rough. We needed to get beyond the pasture ahead, but he did not seem to know what to do next, and commenced whispering with Sally and his wife. They will likely have little fires, I said, interrupting their talk. On a rainy night, the officers will let them have fires to drive off the cold, and they will give a signal to say everything is okay, probably every 15 minutes. That is how our guards work, anyway. Davy told this to the others, then said we would wait for the next signal, and if he felt it was safe, we would move ahead. Otherwise, we would have to go back and try another night. I was to carry the little girl, while he would carry the small boy. That way, there would be fewer feet to cause noise. I also told Davy that once we was past the ring of guards, we should angle to the left and then stop to listen again. There might be a second line of guards posted, and they would signal at a different time than the first. Sally was right, Davy whispered as he shouldered one of his children. She said a sergeant in the army would know things that would help us. Even so young a sergeant. She knew that the moment she saw you. I must have looked startled by his words. I don't believe I present a very military appearance just now. But Davy added, It was in your eyes, Sergeant. Sally can tell a lot by the eyes. I picked up the girl and she immediately began reaching toward Sally, whimpering to be in her arms. My shoulder and arm hurt somewhere I'd landed on them, but that wasn't what bothered me most. I was thinking, this could be very bad for us, especially if the girl got loud. Fortunately, Sally was right there, soothing and hushing her gently, so the girl did not struggle hard to get free of my arms. What Sally said I do not know, but I did hear the name Harriet several times, so I commenced whispering in Harriet's other ear, and saying her name often, till she turned her big eyes on me, and even reached out to touch my face and whisper something back to me. It was while we was whispering back and forth that I realized how light she was. A good gust could have sent her sailing like a leaf, and how thin her arms and legs really was. Pretty soon Harriet grabbed hold of my uniform and held tight. Around then I heard a distant shout, and immediately it was repeated and repeated and repeated down the line of guards. The voices got louder and clearer as they approached, till we could hear the guards singing out, "All is quiet," one after another. The call was sounded just to our right, where Davy had seen the fire, and then, not more than 100 feet away, it came again on our left. Then the call continued its journey, fading away to nothing as it went around the rest of the pasture. Davy did not hesitate, but moved forward very slowly. Now was a time to be thankful for a rainy, moonless night, as we was as silent and as invisible as tiny night creatures trying to avoid the eyes of the owl. After we passed the first line of guards and went to the left, we halted again to listen. Not long after this, the same shouted signal could be heard sweeping around the pasture. Fortunately, the inside line was not spaced so tightly together, so it was easy to slip between the nearest guards. We was now between the guards and the main camp, circling around the pasture in a bit of woods I would guess was 300 feet from the camp, enough that I could see where the woods gave way to open pasture, but could not see any tents or other army equipment. During all of the waiting, Harriet fell fast asleep on my shoulder, her breath coming regular and warm, as if nothing in the world was wrong, and I was happy to have it so. We traveled like this all the way around the pasture, a half a mile at least, and eventually we came to a spot where Davy wanted to cut off into the woods again, which meant we had to go back through the lines of guards once more. This time he was aided not only by the regular call, but by the fact that a guard's change took place just then. There was all sorts of commands being issued, men talking, mostly complaining that the change of guards was late, as usual, and a general stomping and crashing through the underbrush with some cussing. So we hunched down low and was past all of them in just a few minutes. Davy picked up the pace a mite then, and I assumed that meant there was no Rebs camped over here. So on we went, over fallen down trees, around rocks, across little streams. In some sections the walking was easy, but just when I relaxed a little, some sticker bush would jab at me to remind me I wasn't safe yet. The sleeping Harriet had pulled her legs up and made her body into a ball, so carrying her even in the rough terrain was easy. The land was thickly wooded and generally flat for nearly an hour, but then we came on a series of steep hills with lots of slippery rocks to climb. At one point, Davy decided to walk up the middle of a cold, fast-moving stream, and we followed. All of this was beginning to wear me down, my leg and arm being banged up as they was, and Harriet suddenly seeming to grow heavier. I started to breathe hard. How was Sally holding up, I wondered? How was Martha and the oldest girl doing? But they all seemed fine. Fortunately for me, Davy stopped often to listen and to peer ahead into the darkness, which gave me time to rest. He seemed to be choosing particularly rough terrain for our travel, to avoid Red patrols, I guessed. There was hardly any other life in here, for that matter. Even the animals stayed clear of these places. We came to a narrow road and stopped to rest and taste some of Sally's food. Harry and her brother slept on, while Sally, Martha, and the older girl looked as exhausted as I felt. "Are we far?" I asked. I did not want to walk another step if I did not have to, and besides, we had used up just about all of the night already. Davy was working on some cornbread and looking up the road. "Far?" he said. "Not very far, I think," but he did not seem very sure of this. "Do you know where this road leads?" I asked. "North," Davy said. "I think it leads north." "You think?" I asked, and I am certain my voice sounded alarmed. "You mean you're not sure if this road goes north?" Sally must have heard my upset, because she and Davy and Martha began talking back and forth among themselves, putting this way and that, sometimes up the road, sometimes into the woods behind us. Then Davy said, "Sally said the road goes north to a bigger road. She says if we follow the big road a few miles, it will take us to a place where we can cross the river." I thought about this a moment. The road was temptingly flat, and I know my feet would welcome a few miles that did not include tree roots, large rocks, and streams. Then I thought better. "If the Reb control the land above here," I said, "they will have guards posted in places. We should stick to the woods." A heartbeat later, as if to prove me correct, we heard a rumbling that was already mighty close to us. I rolled over and partly covered the sleeping children. Get down and stay still, I hissed, and soon we was all no more than lumps on the road. And a good thing, too. The rumbling, the sound of hoofs, I now realized, was accompanied by the click of metal on metal. Then the cavalry, Reb, I could just see, began going past our position, one after another, on, without end. 100, maybe 200, maybe more. After a while I gave up looking at them and closed my eyes. We was not more than 15 feet from them, but Davy had selected a spot deep in shadow, and the riders swept past us. If any glanced our way, they probably thought we was rocks or logs. Even after the line of horses ended and everything grew quiet again, we stayed on the ground without moving. That was close, I said when I finally got up and had Harriet in my arms again. Come along, was all Davy said. No time to waste. We was across the road, and we ran very quickly to the cover of the other side and plunged into the woods. A little beyond the road we came to an empty field. I think this is good, I said. I was remembering Caesar's finger moving over the map in Lieutenant Tom's tent, and how he said there was more farmland along the Rapidan. We skirted this field and soon came to another and another. Then there was another section of woods, and not long after this we came to a wide body of water, the Rapidan. Davy took us up along the river several miles to where the ford was. Which army controls this area, I wondered. Fortunately, I heard a series of orders issued, all in a very comforting northern accent. At the ford, the guard challenged me just as soon as he heard us, telling me to halt and say the password. I answered by telling him who I was and what company I was part of. I have been lost in the woods since the 6th, I told him. Come forward slowly with your hands raised, he ordered, and I did as ordered. I would raise my hands, I said as I stepped from the woods, but I have a child in my arms, and there are more with me. 5 more. He had his musket pointed at me as we approached, and his eyes opened wide when he took in my appearance, and then saw Sally and the others. Damn if you don't look just like one of these niggers here, the guard said. I moved a few steps closer and turned to the side so he could see my sergeant's chevrons. These are my friends, Private, and they saved my life. You will treat them with respect. Do you hear? I didn't mean nothing by it, Sergeant, he sputtered. It's just that you look... well, you look... Never mind how I look, Private. Take me to the officer in charge and be quick about it. We was brought into camp then, and left at the guard's tent with warm blankets to wrap ourselves in. I handed Harriet over to Sally, though Harriet actually clung to me, so it took some doing to pry her fingers loose. Next some tins of army coffee appeared, just as thick and old as any I have ever had, and just as delicious. A bucket of water was produced, and I watched as much of the mud from my face and hands as I could. The others was now huddled on a cot, wrapped tight in their blankets and sinking fast into needed sleep. Except Sally, that is. Harriet had gotten fretful, and Sally had her on her lap, was stroking her hair and humming. After this an officer came to question me, and I was happy to tell him about the Reb troops I'd seen near Sally's, and the cavalry headed along the road. I tried to find out about the 122nd in my company, but this officer was sour at being called out so late, and anyway, he did not have much information about them. He did say that the fight in the woods had gone back and forth. First they looked to take the day, and then us. He couldn't have meant where he was, since it was clear that they had beat us badly there. The fighting swung to our favor after their General Longstreet was wounded and had to leave the battle, but then General Lee managed to get his army over to Spotsylvania before we did, and was still there and still fighting. He didn't know exactly where our regiment was. They could be anywhere between the Old Wilderness and Spotsylvania, or they could have even been pulled from the fight and put in reserve. You should get some rest, Sergeant, and report to the adjutant's tent for duty tomorrow afternoon. Report for what? I wondered, but that wasn't the most important thing on my mind just then. What about these people, sir? I asked. They helped me escape. We'll see about them tomorrow, Sergeant. There are some empty tents over by the sutler shanty you can use. The sergeant of the guard will show you where they are. I thanked him, and then the sergeant came in and took us to our tents for the night. I was so tired I did not even remember saying good night or thank you to Davy or Sally or any of her family. But there will be tomorrow for that. Tonight I am to sleep on a soft cot under a warm blanket. But first I will reread Sarah's letters one more time and pray for peaceful dreams. May 11th. Spoke with a capper at Riskhand around noon. He told me there was no way to know where G Company was at present, and that till this was known I would be assigned to help unload ambulances. In the past this would have been just fine with me, being a safe occupation, but I protested this time. Only the captain did not want to hear any of it. I also told the captain about what Sally and Davy had done for me, and ask if they could get help from anyone. There is a new group running around the camp these days, the Union Commission, from up in St. Louis or thereabouts. I'll ask them what can be done. I thanked him and then took lunch, a mighty heap of it, and wrote Sarah a brief letter to tell her I am very much alive, and that I was sure Johnny was too. After, I went to the field hospital to help with arriving ambulances. The ambulances stream into camp day and night fully loaded. Most of the wounded are being transferred from regimental hospitals close to the fighting and have already been treated. Many others have been wandering about for days and have only now found their way to the surgeons. The surgeons here are very busy, prying pieces of metal from torn up flesh and sawing off mangled bone. I ask about the 122nd and G Company whenever I can, but no one, not the ambulance drivers, surgeons, nurses, litter carriers, or wounded, has any news of them. When he heard me asking these things, one of the other litter carriers said, "If you ask too often, you'll find them for sure, and then you'll be back in it." I have been here 4 weeks and expect that I can stay as long as I don't make too much noise. I thought about what this soldier said all day. They certainly need help here, as the ambulances keep arriving, but the number of wounded tells me that they need help out there too, and maybe more so. 7 o'clock. When my date was over, I went hunting for Sally and Davey and their family. It took a while, but I found them with some officers, all of them working at cleaning clothes and cooking and such. I arrived just as Sally was lecturing a captain about leaving his clothes all about his tent, and the captain, who did not understand a word she was saying, just stood there nodding his head while his friends laughed at the scene. Davy said they had traded one dirty house for another, but at least here they can leave when they want, and it seems they will be doing just that in 2 or 3 weeks, according to Davy. A representative from the Union Commission said a trade would take them to St. Louis, where the group has its headquarters and is helping refugees from the South. Sally brought us bowls of potatoes, carrots, and beef, much different food from what we just had a day ago. While we ate, I asked Davy and Sally some questions that had come into my head, like where Sally had come from, that she speaks French and not American. Davy told me, Sally is from an island off the coast of South America. She and her sister was taken and sold to people living outside of New Orleans when Sally was 7. It was a big place and the white folk was decent enough, but then yellow jack fever came and lots of people died. My mother and father and brother's family. Sally's husband, too. Even our master's wife. That was when he decided to leave, so his 2 children would be safe from Yellow Jack. And Sally raised such a fuss till he brought us all to Virginia. We was in Virginia 10 years when you come along. I asked if they had ever considered running north before now, and Davy said, "We considered it every day, even before the war. But Sally said no, we had to wait for the right time. Sally said you wanted to get back to your soldier friends something bad, and knew you would too. And so would we if we went along. She could tell you did not give up easy." We talked more, mostly about what they did, which sounded like a lot like what I did on Uncle and Aunt's farm, except that I was never beat, no matter how bad things got, and I could leave and not worry that anyone would hunt me down. Seems that Sally was such a talker and so stubborn that her owner thought the house might be quieter, and other Negroes less agitated, if she wasn't around all the time, which is why he let her live apart in the abandoned tobacco shack. I told them that I had included them in my journal, and I took it out to show them. Sally spotted the mini ball hole and touched it, looking from it to me. Then her face brightened, and she spoke to Davy. "Sally says she is proud to be in your book. She said your words must be very strong to stop a musket ball like that." May 12th. I think some would call it a miracle. Today I was helping with the wounded when I heard a voice say, "Sergeant Pease, we all thought you dead and gone." It was Pete McQuaid, who had bandages on both his hands, his right leg, and parts of his face, and he looked to be thinner besides. He told me that after I was killed, because that is what everyone thought, wave after wave of Rebs came over, and Major Pettit's men finally called retreat. Most of those who could move themselves made it back to the main road, where the officers rallied them. They went up the road and joined the fight again, but then the woods caught fire and forced them to retire a second time. That is where Pete got shot in the leg, and then the fire burned him as he was crawling off. "The company's been shot up bad, Sergeant," he added, though he didn't remember exactly who had been killed or wounded. I asked about Johnny, and Pete thought him fine the last he remembered seeing him. But the fighting has moved over near Spotsylvania and is very hot, I heard. They was headed for the Nye River last I saw them. I told Pete I would be going over there myself, just as soon as I could break free from my duties here. Pete said he thought they could use my help, and then he told me to fetch something from his vest pocket that I should keep. It was a coin, the silver coin Sarah had sent me for good luck, and which I gave to Pete a while back. This didn't do you much good, Pete, I said. Oh, but it did, Pete replied. I count myself lucky to have gotten out at all. A lot didn't. I tucked the coin into the pocket with Sarah's letters, thanked Pete, and went back to my work. Later I found the officer in charge and told him I knew where my company was and wanted to go back to them, but he said I would have to wait till orders was issued officially. I said it was important that I get back to them. He said it was important to wait for the signed papers to come through. Otherwise we will both be in trouble, Sergeant, he explained. General Grant is cracking down on stragglers and such, and he is a man who means business. I thought about what this officer said while I helped move the wounded from the ambulance to the surgeon's tent. Sergeant Donahue always said, "An order is an order, and it isn't our job to go and question them either." That is true, I believe, but I do not recall the officer ordering me to stay in camp, and I have certainly not heard from General Grant directly, so I have decided to leave before anyone gets around to ordering me not to. May 13th. Said a tearful goodbye to Sally and Davey and the others, and thanked them over and over for helping me, and wished them well in St. Louis. Next I found Pete McQuaid and told him what I was doing. Then I hitched a ride out of camp on an ambulance, which took me up the road several miles. Have walked ever since, the roads being less congested at night, though still busy with supply wagons going and coming, cattle being taken to the army for food, and ambulances, of course. The ambulances never seem to rest. Came upon some soldiers having breakfast at sunrise, and was invited to join them. For $1! These fellows had been near the center of the line of battle on the morning of May 6th, and had been pretty well licked by the Rebs, too. When I asked one of them which was the fastest way to Spotsylvania Courthouse, he just shook his head and said, "Take my word for it, Sergeant. You don't want to go over there. It is a living hell." When I said I did, he handed me his musket and cartridge box and said, "You will need these more than me. I'm going home." His rifle felt heavy to me, not having held one in many days. Heavier than I remember, and much heavier than little Harriet. I had to smile when he wished me good shooting. Later. I am down to the last page of this journal. Who would have believed I would be alive to say that? And so I must choose my words carefully. The road has been very busy as I get closer and closer to the fighting. Early in the afternoon I heard the rumble of the big siege guns in the distance. The sound of artillery grew louder and stronger, booming and booming away, and when I pictured them, and what they could accomplish, my legs wobbled some. Came to several cut-offs in the road, with streams of men and wagons heading up them and away from the fighting. The crackle of musket fire could be heard now too, mingling with the rumbling thunder of the cannons. I have to admit that I thought a second or two about turning up one of those roads and disappearing into the crowd. Most everyone thinks me dead, so I probably wouldn't be missed. But then I thought about Sally, who helped me when she really did not have to and put herself at risk. And Harriet. How many other Harriets are there waiting still for our help? And I thought about Johnny, who was like a brother to me, and Lieutenant Toms and the rest of the boys. I even thought about Charlie Shelp, who was as cussed as they come and no friend of mine. But I think I can handle him just as I can handle Reb Sharpshooters, Mike Hurst, and Army Coffee. And there is Sarah, too, who I never want to disappoint. Ever. Which got me to thinking. When I left Uncle and Aunt, I left nothing and headed toward nothing. Now I am heading toward people who count on me and need me, even if just a little. I will probably never be a very brave soldier, but I think I can do my job and do it in an honorable way. After this war is over, who knows? I looked up just then, and there, not many feet in front of me, was a captain on horseback staring right at me. He had a crisp uniform, a perfectly clipped mustache, sat very straight on his horse, and seemed to be the sort who did not take much nonsense. When I was closer, he called out to me in a sharp voice, "Where are you going, Sergeant?" I will tell you that my heart jumped a beat and my blood ran cold, thinking I had been caught absent without permission, and would have to pay the price. But then I gave the captain a sharp salute, like those the lieutenant gave to the captain delivering our orders each morning. "I have deserted my post at the field hospital, sir," I said, "and am heading to Spotsylvania and to the fighting." The captain looked at me a moment, trying to figure out if I was lying or just crazy. "What is your name, Sergeant?" he asked. "I am Sergeant James Edmond Pease, G Company, the 122nd Regiment, New York Volunteers, from Onondaga County, sir. But I did not volunteer to carry stretchers." The good captain looked at me closely, and I am certain he decided then I was indeed crazy. But he just smiled at me and said, "Then you better hurry along, Sergeant. They will needing you about now." "Yes, sir," I said. I then turned to go on my way when the captain called out, "Oh, and Sergeant, good luck to you." "Thank you, sir," I replied, "but I believe I have all the luck I will need."